It's such a pleasure to be here, and I think the first video that was shown this morning really set up what I'd like to discuss with you and engage all of you in, and it ended with a line that said, "It's the age of possibility." And I'd like to talk to you about young people who are coming of age in this time. And my topic I'd like to explore with you is what it's going to be like to be 12 in 2012. This is a generation of young people who came about, they were born on the cusp of a new millennium. This group of young people, more than any others in society, have lived in a truly digital, always-on social world from day one. Now, what's really interesting is when you're 12 or 13 in most cultures and societies around the world, that's when you leave behind childhood and sort of the comforts of the carefree lifestyle of being a kid, and you make that transition into adulthood where you start to become a responsible member of society. Well, what's really interesting about this particular group of kids is they know more about this digital world than many of us. And we're the grown-ups who are supposed to be advising them. So it creates all kinds of challenges and interesting nuance, certainly for parents and those of us in this room who really want to guide people into the future. So what I'm going to ask all of you to do is I'm going to share a couple of my ideas for this young group, for the kids who are turning 12 in 2012. And then at the end, I'm going to invite you to join me in a community, of course on Facebook, where we can actually have a dialogue and you can share with these young people, that bit of information about yourself, that part of your life that really helped you somewhere along the way. Or think of it like you've gone back in a time capsule and you've met yourself at 12 years old. What advice would you give yourself? So that's what I'd like to focus on today. Let's see, where are we? The kids who grew up, the kids who are 12 in 2012, were literally born into a world. They were the last citizens of the 20th century, and then the first citizens of the 21st. These kids, like more than any other members of society, are challenging the boundaries and experiencing the complexities of life in a totally connected world. This particular group of people I have a connection to because I live with one of them. I am the mom of a nearly 12-year-old son who I'm watching, every day, and all I can think of when I observe him living his life in this crazy new world is, how can I help him grow? How can I help him become the best person he can be? And how do I help him achieve his potential? These kids really grew up, These kids really grew up in a time where it's like a perfect storm of technology. And for the first time in human history, mass automations come to personal communication. So when we were kids and we took our summer holidays or wanted to communicate an idea that we had, we'd send a postcard to every one of our friends. We'd handwrite that postcard and we'd take it to the post and we'd hope, our fingers crossed, it was going to reach the person it was intended for. And if we wanted feedback from people, we had to pick up the phone and ring 30 friends or colleagues, and it was a completely different world. Well, the kids today, they have 50 different epiphanies a day where they come up with some, amazing new idea that they want to share. And they share that instantly in high-resolution photos, videos with all their friends that they're connected to. And I think what's really interesting about this new wave of the internet is that it's somehow now becoming more cool to be yourself. What I found with my son and his friends is how accepting they are of individuals and how open they are because of their exposure to more and more types of people. Now, peer pressure, of course, has not subsided. Peer pressure is something that, as a mother, you witness every day. But what we are finding is that this new advent of creativity and the ability to express yourself is opening up entirely new possibilities for kids. And what we're starting to see is, we'll see kids submitting, videos on YouTube, and you can almost imagine them becoming the next Steven Spielberg. And you listen to them talking around the dinner table or with their friends, and you can imagine them speaking in front of the UN or the world's great halls of government. I think we're preparing this group of people like never before for the future. Let's see. So I have a couple of nuggets of wisdom, just my own personal anecdotes of things I'd like to share. And the first one is, to all the young people out there, you are the author of your own life story. when you're a young teen, the first question you're asking yourself is, what am I going to be when I grow up? And it becomes this sort of nagging sort of question. Now, how can you decide what you want to be when you want to grow up when you're only 12 years old? But honestly, we as a society put these kind of restrictions on kids, and we start saying, okay, you better get serious, you better think about what you can be when you grow up. And, you know, honestly, we need to back off, because kids need a chance to tell their own life story and to really discover who they are and what they want to become. And I'd like to share a story a little bit about my life. You know, I never do this, but I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, in a very sort of what we call the Rust Belt part of America. And when I was 12, way back in 1974, the first wave of manufacturing was leaving America, and we had about 20% unemployment in my hometown. So much like some of the really economic conditions today, we were really living in a very difficult time. And girls back in 1974 in rural Pennsylvania weren't expected to be anything more than, you know, if you were lucky, a nurse, a teacher, which are really promising professions, but we weren't really taught to dream. We weren't given that freedom to think about really becoming something unique and challenging our way of life. So secretly I had this idea that one day I would travel the world and be something more. Well, I had a teacher at the time, a very tough teacher, who saw me trying to fit in with the in crowd of girls in my school, and he said, "Hey, you, come over here." And I was scared because I thought he was going to shout at me about something. I thought I'd done something wrong. And he said, "Forget about what those girls think of you. You know, you come over here and sit down with the boys and study and you know, learn about math, science, and physics." And he gave me the best piece of advice I can imagine. And that was, he said, "Get your mind prepared for the future and get yourself out of this town." I really need to thank him for that. But my first instinct as a young woman was he was talking about my physical appearance. And I'll go back. Now, this is not me, but this kind of looks like me at 12. I was as tall as I am right now when I was 12 years old, and I had the same size feet. So it wasn't a pretty sight. I had glasses that, you know, I had inherited the eyesight of my maternal grandmother, she was nearly blind, bless her. And, you know, I had braces on my teeth, so thank God my parents saved enough money to have my teeth straightened. But it took 4 years. So you can imagine, like, how you feel, the awkwardness of a 12-year-old and facing, you know, the it crowd and trying to fit in. And I'm so grateful to that teacher for taking me aside and giving me that bit of information that, you know, up until then, you know, only my parents ever shared that they thought I had potential. But, you know, as a kid, you really discount what your parents think. So it takes a leader or somebody you respect to really help you move through your life. And that teacher got me on a path. He introduced a fork in the road that totally transformed my life. I started studying with the boys. I finished my studies early. I went on to university, and by the time I was, you know, 22 years old, I'd already had a master's. And now kids from my town really didn't have those opportunities. So I really want to thank this gentleman. Now, the next topic I'd like to explore is every kid is afraid of something. But I want to tell all the kids out there that they're not alone, because adults are afraid of a lot of things too. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't know if you remember, but in the 70s, we were all convinced that we had the threat of the Soviet Union, and we were all convinced that we were all, our end was going to be nuclear annihilation. In 1974, Richard Nixon resigned from office in shame, and we as Americans, for the first time, had to come to terms with the fact that our government had lied to us. It was a really tough time to be a kid. But I tell this story not because I think that when I was growing up it was tougher to be a kid, but because, you know, I think that every generation has its set of fears, and that fear is natural, and that, you know, kids need to realize that they're not alone. Our kids in the past decade were worried about terrorism. You know, this threat you couldn't see was really dominating our thoughts and our feelings. And they also worry about global warming, and they worry about the fact that, you know, perhaps there won't be enough resources to help them live and to have a normal life. And these are very real fears. But it's really important as adults in society to rest assured that, you know, these kids, that they know that, you know, the Soviet Union collapsed, and many of those countries are now part of our EU here. And, you know, the threats of, you know, that we faced as kids, you know, many of them didn't come to pass. And as my mother said, the one really important message to kids is when you go to sleep at night is that everything always looks better in the morning. Now, the conference theme is around authenticity. And I thought it would be interesting to, when you think about telling young people that they're the author of their own life story and telling them not to worry or be afraid, is to think about how we express ourselves and how we build our lives online. A Facebook profile is empty until you populate it with your friends, until you invite them to join you, until you connect with the television shows, the media you love, and you start to share your ideas and your opinions. But every individual then becomes, their own person on Facebook. And I think this is really unique because it's the first time ever that, individuals on the web are their authentic selves. And, I think this is really important because this is the foundation of which young people start to tell their stories and they start to build their progression in life. The other really important concept I'd like to discuss, and I think we have to thank Google for this, but information has become a commodity. When we were kids and we wanted to research an idea or we had a project we had to do, we had to go to a library and spend hours, if not days, pouring through all kinds of volumes of books and data. And then, the premium at that time was really on finding information. Well, today, everything you ever want to know is at the end of a search query. And you have it instantly. And so the real premium now for young people is what you do with that information. So my message to young people is don't just consume information. How do you make it your own? How do you process it, analyze it, decipher it? How do you make it special, and how do you add your unique value? Because in the world today, information is a commodity, and the differentiation is really about you. Another topic that's quite interesting is learning used to be confined to institutions and museums and places that you had to check into and actually go to. Well, now learning happens all throughout your life. You're walking down the street and you see a monument and you want to know what it's all about, you search and you find out what that's about and you instantly have that knowledge and you carry on in your life. So knowledge and learning is now part of the life experience. Now the next and then the last one before I open this up to all of you, bit of advice that I want to share for young people came about in a conversation I was having with some colleagues at a conference. And a friend of mine named Tarek Krim, he's an entrepreneur, a very successful European entrepreneur. He and I were talking about when we were, college students and how we were so ambitious and idealistic and optimistic about the world. And we really felt that we could change the status quo. And we organized, I was sharing with him my experience of organizing student protests in Washington, D.C. against apartheid and how we printed, banners and placards. And we went all around. I don't think we did well in school that semester because all we did was plaster the campuses with these placards to tell people to come and protest. And we were talking about that, we really had all this desire to change the world, but we didn't have the tools. And I think for young people today, they have the tools. They have the ability to organize themselves and to come together in ways that never existed before in society. But the question I have for young people is, do you have the desire? And how can you find your passion? How can you find the thing that inspires you and that, not only leads you to your future, but also, enables you to then take the tools that are available and accessible to you and to change the world? So, I'd like to leave you all with a few thoughts. I'm inviting you to join me on Facebook. It's called 12 in 2012. And I want you to ask yourself the question that I posed at the beginning. If you could travel back in time and meet yourself at 12 years old, what would you share with yourself? What would you tell? What heartbreak would you save yourself from? What idea or epiphany that you had too far into a process would you try to give yourself that information in advance? Or also just think about what you would tell a 12-year-old that's in your life today. And please join me, and I will make a commitment to you and to the kids that are becoming 12 in 2012, that I'll assemble all this information and try to put it in a usable framework for young people to reference and at least, to have that little anecdote that might save them some heartache. And I'm hoping you'll all join me, and looking forward to your comments. So let's give these kids a path. Let's help them make sense of it all. Thanks very much.